The Gilgal Conference was done in Osaka, Japan through the use of Zoom, since COVID-19 prevented me from attending personally. The conference focus was on Israel's final preparation to claim the Promised Land and lessons we can utilize today. The conference was a 2-day Saturday and Sunday event with 2 sessions presented on Saturday and a final session on Sunday. Only the 3 conference sessions are included here, but you're free to design your own worship program and music for your own conference. In this presentation, only the English translation is used, but it is also being prepared in Japanese and Chinese. Other languages can also be prepared by your contacting me at vball_one@hotmail.com. Encamped in Gilgal. In this session, we will look at the camp of Gilgal and the events that took place there and what that means to us today. Follow me as we look into the scriptures, Joshua 5, verses 10 through 15. And the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the selfsame day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more. But they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him, with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him, and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place wherein thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. At the conclusion of session 1, we saw that God had rolled away the reproach of Egypt from the children of Israel. And because of that event, their campsite was named Gilgal, which means rolling or a circle. In the coming years, it was to be a place of renewal and worship. For example, it was one of the stops of Samuel's annual circuit as he judged Israel. It was also the place where Samuel and Saul worshiped upon his being anointed as king of Israel, and where Saul was accepted as king by the people of Israel. It was at Gilgal that the people were called together to form an army to fight the Philistines. It was at Gilgal that Elijah was taken up into heaven, and also where Elisha made a pottage for the sons of the prophets during a food shortage. King David passed through Gilgal as he fled from Absalom. We read that in Joshua 4:19. The people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho. So, Where was Gilgal located? According to this verse, it was located just east of Jericho. That would place it within the 4 miles between Jericho and the Jordan River, and within sight of Jericho, while being far enough up the banks of the Jordan to be beyond flood stage. We know that they crossed the Jordan River on the 10th day of the first month, and there they camped at Gilgal. That's in Joshua 4:19. So, what was going on in the Gilgal camp? They were to address the things that the Lord had instructed them to do. And the first thing was to administer circumcision. That had been omitted for 39 years, and then they had to take time to heal from it. This was addressed in the first session. The next thing was to wait until the date of the Passover, which was 4 days later, on the 14th day of the first month. Now, Passover was first observed in Egypt as the 10th plague, the plague of the death angel. The Hebrews were instructed to kill a lamb and smear its blood on the doorpost and the lintel of the entrance to the house. This was a sign of their faith in God. When the death angel came and saw the blood, he would pass over that house and not kill the firstborn child. It was a picture of what it takes to arrest the effect of sin. Hebrews 9:22 tells us without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. Numbers 9, verses 2 and 3, let the children of Israel also keep the Passover at his appointed season. In the 14th day of this month, at even, and ye shall keep it in his appointed season, according to all the rites of it, and according to all the ceremonies thereof, ye shall keep it. The second time it was observed was at Mount Sinai, in the second year after they came out of Egypt. When some of the people could not observe the Passover because they were unclean, they were given an alternate date 1 month later. In that, they were to observe the Passover. This occasion would be only the third time that the Passover would be observed. It's the first time it would be observed in the Promised Land. Israel had been slacking in following God's instructions, as seen in their non-compliance of circumcision. Now, it was time for them to take serious God's instructions. The Passover was a foreshadowing of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. He is the perfect Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. The wages of sin is death. So he paid that debt of sin for all mankind. Now, the payment for sin has been fully satisfied in Christ. Outside of Christ, we are without remedy and must face God with our own sin. However, the blood of Christ on the door of our heart, the death angel will pass over us, and we do not have to face the judgment for sin. The third event that occurred was the day after Passover, when the children of Israel first tasted of the corn of the land. Consider, most of the people of Israel that were now alive were born in the wilderness. The generation of the Exodus had died off in the wilderness wanderings when they refused to follow God by faith. Some died at the worship of the golden calf. Some by the fiery serpents. Some by the earth swallowing them up as they opposed God. and some died in the 40 years of the wilderness wandering. Those now left had a different mindset toward God. They did not have the former life of Egypt to draw them away from God. All they had ever known was that they had been fed by God, which included manna and quail. They had never tasted the corn or grain of the promised land. This must have been quite an experience of adjusting their palate to the grain of the land, as well as to the unleavened cakes and the parched grain, all in one day. This was the first sustenance from the promised land and must have given them a strong sense of finally having arrived. Joshua 5:11 says, "And they did eat of the corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the selfsame day." Whenever you transition from one phase of life, there is both gain and loss. Israel gained a new diet and the fruit of the land, but they also lost the blessing of the manna. Manna was described as the bread which the Lord gave. It was a picture of the Lord Jesus. He said, "I am the bread which came down from heaven." In Exodus 16:15, we read, "And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, 'It is manna,' for they wist not what it was. And Moses said unto them, 'This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat.'" Manna's appearance was like coriander seed and tastes like wafers made with honey. We see that in Exodus 16:31. "And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna. And it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey." In Joshua 5:12, "And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more. But they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year." Only a homer of manna was kept in the Ark of the Covenant as a memorial for the next generation. We read that in Exodus 16:33. "And Moses said unto Aaron, Take a pot, put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations." We read further in Exodus 16:35, "And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years, until they came to a land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came to the borders of the land of Canaan." Regardless of the means, God is still the provider of all of our needs. And then we come to the captain of the host. In Joshua 5:13, it reads this way, "And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with the sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries?" At this point of time, we find Joshua doing some of his own scouting of Jericho. And obviously, he was being diligent in preparing for the impending confrontation. It states that he lifted up his eyes and looked. I understand that this was a spiritual revelation, seeing the captain of the heavenly host. He is God's general that will direct the spiritual armies against Canaan. It is important to note that in the ordering of our affairs in life, There is a physical element and there is a spiritual element that must work in harmony to do God's will. This harmony is accomplished only when the spiritual controls the physical. That is something we're not comfortable with because we're not in control, and because we're unaware of what God is doing, and because we cannot sense the spiritual with our only our physical senses. In short, we cannot see, we're unaware, and we're untrained in the spiritual realm. This is where the life of faith is positioned. Walking by faith in Jesus does not require strength, wisdom, or skill, but rather trust. He does the work when we trust Him to do what He has already revealed is His will. Our job is the believing. His job is the doing. Notice that the captain of the host stood against him with his sword drawn. That is an aggressive position which would suggest that he was opposed to Joshua. Apparently, harmony had not yet been achieved. Then Joshua does something that seems just totally wrong. He moves toward the captain of the host. That would put him in a closer proximity and could invite the battle, but in this case, Joshua wanted to talk and not fight, so he asked the question, "Are you for us or against us?" The premise of that question indicates that this is our battle. So whose side are you on? The captain of the host's response must have taken Joshua by surprise when he replied, he was not on either side. This wasn't God's battle, not Israel's. And he was there to lead this spiritual conflict, not to follow. So much of the time we ask God to bless our plans and to supply our needs when we need to join His forces in doing His will, His way. Recall again God's promise in Exodus 3:8. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, and to the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And in Exodus 6:6 is reiterated again. Wherefore, say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will rid you out of their bondage. And I will redeem you with a outstretched arm and with great judgments. Deuteronomy 7:1 and 2 takes this even a step further. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hast cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. The captain's reply simply meant, I'm not come to join your fight. You are come to join God's fight. It's not about you. It's about God. He has worked with the Canaanites for over 400 years, and He has determined that it is time for them to go. Joshua's response is classic. He does what every man will ultimately do. He fell on his face and he worshiped. His submission was what was needed to establish the harmony in the spiritual conflict. God doesn't need our wealth, or our skill, or our time. What He wants from us is our faith in Him. That's all that's required. Quit working for God and let God work for you. He has no shortages. He has all power. He is eternal beyond time, and we are His workmanship. It is His desire to bless you with the riches of heaven. So don't offend Him with your pride or your plans. Your worship is simply the acknowledging of who He really is. You need to know Him personally and get in step with His plan of the ages. Joshua then asked him the correct question. What saith my Lord unto His servant? Submission to the Lord is critical in doing spiritual battle. Joshua was directed to take off his shoes, for the place he was standing on was holy ground. The removal of the shoe was in reference to our aids to do God's will. Much of the time we feel that God needs our help. In fact, it is just the opposite. He doesn't need our help at all. But we desperately need His involvement. The only requirement that God places on us is that of our faith in Him. That is His only chosen method of operation. God's covenant relationship with Abraham was established on Abraham's faith in God's promise. Now, 400 plus years later, the promise is given. The land to his descendants required their faith in God as well. This pattern is carried throughout the Scriptures, and we find that without faith it is impossible to please Him. That is God. Hebrews 11:6. It further states that whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Romans 14:23. The Scripture states further that we are sanctified by faith. We're justified by faith. We have access by faith. We walk by faith. And that the world is overcome by faith. God is revealed to the world at each faith event in our lives in Romans 1:17. It is the door that opens miraculous events. And Jesus asked a soul-searching question as He taught His disciples. He said, when the Son of Man cometh, shall He find faith on the earth? If He came today, would He find you walking by faith? One final note. Verse 15 closes with this statement. And Joshua did so. Your faith is completed by your obedience to His revealed will. You're not responsible for what He has not said, no matter how urgent you think it is. It's not about doing, it's about believing. It's not about you, it's about people knowing Him. So, how long was it from the crossing of the Jordan River until the siege upon Jericho? It was at least several days. Could have been as long as a few weeks. Looking at it from the point of view of the people of Jericho, I can just imagine they were asking such questions as, what are they waiting for? What are they doing? They already knew why they came, what the Lord had done to get them there. Nothing appeared to be preparation for battle or an assault upon the city. The phrase, "the suspense is killing me," seems appropriate here. It's important to remember that they were looking at the soldiers of Israel as their enemy. But they were being confronted by God. God was busy preparing Israel to walk by faith and to trust in Him. They would only mop up after God had initiated the battle. The Canaanites had completely overlooked the real battle within themselves by continually rejecting God for over 400 years. And now they were being ejected from the land by God.